high-stake elections in Taiwan have begun. Voters began casting ballots in Taiwan's presidential and legislative elections, a poll closely watched as China steps up its rhetoric over the self-ruled island. Polls opened at 8 a.m. local time at nearly 18,000 locations from the island's south to its capital, Taipei. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen has cast her vote. Remember, Tsai is constitutionally barred from standing again after 2 terms in office. Taiwan People's Party leader Ko Wen-je was also among the early voters. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Liu Shanqiu, a Chinese diplomat and a top contender to be China's next foreign minister. The meeting took place in Washington just hours before the polls in Taiwan. The U.S. continued to caution China against using the election as a pretext for instability. As reports quoting the State Department, Blinken has asked China for cross-strait stability. And in news just coming in, Taiwan's defense minister says it had detected 2 Chinese balloons crossing the Taiwan Strait in the previous 24 hours, one of which flew over Taiwan's island. And now, joining us live from Taipei, we have our Voice of America correspondent, Elizabeth Lee, joining us live. Thanks very much for joining us here on WION, Ms. Lee.
You're welcome. Well, today...
Right, Ms. Lee. Now, the high-stakes election in Taiwan have begun. Give us a sense of the on-ground situation in Taiwan. You're joining us live from Taipei.
Yes, well, there has been much anticipation leading up to today, and people have been talking about it all week. And many of the people for the last couple of days and today have been buying train tickets, plane tickets, just trying to get home to where they're registered to vote. A lot of them are working in the big cities like Taipei, but they actually are registered in a smaller city or a town. So people have traveled, and they're voting today. And just some of the fun buzz around here is that a lot of the local convenience stores and restaurants are offering special deals for people who have voted. And so there's really been a big encouragement for people to go out and vote.
Right, Ms. Lee, China has called the election in Taiwan as a choice between war and peace. How are the voters viewing varying stances by the contestants towards China?
It really depends. We spoke to a lot of people in the past week, and it really depends on the age of the voters. The younger set, especially those who are in the service industry, actually are more concerned about domestic issues, about stagnant wages, about high cost of living and high housing prices. And so many of these younger voters really want the candidates to pay attention on more domestic issues because they're really tired of hearing about cross-race relations. Now, if it's an older set of voters, middle-aged and up, they are very concerned about cross-race relations. But as you mentioned earlier in the newscast about these balloons flying in the air, China's intimidation tactics, for them, it's business as usual. They pretty much ignore news of these things happening because they don't see it overhead. They just hear about it. And so it's been going on for 80 years or more, that this threat of China possibly one day coming over and attacking Taiwan. So people are actually used to the idea, but they are concerned about the future and the survival of Taiwan. Most of the people here, regardless of who they decide to vote for, want the status quo. Those who support the KMT, which is the opposition party, would like more dialogue with China, more business and trade with China, but they also want Taiwan to be democratic. Then the DPP, which is what Tsai Ing-wen, that's the party of Taiwan, and of Lai Ching-te, who is the vice president running for president, they have a more pro-Taiwan stance. And so they've been careful about talking about independence, but that party tends to lean to have Taiwan be independent. And so if William Lai Ching-te, ends up becoming the president, then there's some expectation that China may also have some sort of response. And that's why everyone is keeping a very close eye on what the results are. Polls close at 4 o'clock today, and results are expected to come back at around between 8 and 10 o'clock Taipei time.
Yes, Ms. Lee, you speak of how the young voters are not really concerned about the issue of China here. What are the other issues that the voters are concerned in the polls today in Taiwan?
High cost of housing is a huge issue. People say they can't even afford rent, especially because wages, again, in the service industry has been stagnant. Again, inflation is something that countries around the world have been dealing with, and that's also the case in Taiwan. And traffic is another local problem. But these are just some of the local problems. But again, kind of the cross-race relations, the relationship with China kind of is also something that people is definitely thinking about. And that's also something all three candidates have been speaking about and trying to differentiate themselves on what their platform is with China. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants war. Everybody prefers to keep peace and the status quo.
Thanks, Ms. Lee, for joining us here in WION. We'll, of course, be tracking the Taiwan polls very closely here. Thanks very much.